Hello people, this is a completely off-the-cuff video that I haven't prepared at all, apart from about 3 coffees. And I'm looking at the PDF of the chords in each key sheet that that we had a look at last night. So we have the list of chords in a major key and the list of chords in a minor key. Now, for those that are eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that the actual set of chords in the major and the minor are exactly the same. The only difference is where they start. So in the major key, we have chord 1, major, chord 2, minor, chord 3, minor, chord 4, major, chord 5, major, chord 6, minor, chord 7, yep, the funny one. If we skip over to the minor key list, those are the same order of chords, except this time we start on what was chord 6 minor. So chord 6 minor from the major key list becomes chord 1 minor from the minor key list. So it's like me reading out the major key list of chords like I just did, but instead of starting on chord 1, I start on chord 6. So the minor key chords go minor, then the funny one, then major, minor, minor, major, major. So that's the same order. All we've done is start in a different place. If I loop it, minor, funny one, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, funny one, major, minor, minor, etc. You wouldn't, if you come in halfway, you wouldn't know whether I was talking about the major key chords or the minor key chords, because also what we spoke about last night is that every major key has got a minor key equivalent, what we call the relative minor. And exactly the same with the chords. If the key and the scale has an equivalent, then of course the chords stay the same as well. Like with the scale, the only difference is what number we start on. So our default in music theory is major. So the major scale we name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. With the chords, we don't need chord 8 because chord 8 is exactly the same as chord 1. And we don't think of chords as being pitched in terms of octaves. It makes no difference whether we play the chord using low notes or high notes. The octave doesn't matter. Whereas with a melody, it does. Okay, so what we should learn initially is the major key list, because that's what you're more likely to think about. Major keys being more common across the board. So, chord 1, major, chord 2, minor, chord 3, minor, etc. Learn it by just saying this every day. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, funny one. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, funny one. That's it. There's no way around it apart from just memorizing it. You'll notice that chord 1 and chord 4 and chord 5 are all major. So 1, 4 and 5 are the major chords. Sound-wise, if I'm in G, well, I'm not in G, I've got a capo, notice the capo? But it looks like we'll call it a G chord for now, it looks like a G chord. So in G, chord 1, G major. Chord 4, G, A, B, C, C major. Chord 5, G, A, B, C, D, D major. So that's called the 1, 4, 5. It's the very, very common sequence. If a musician says, can you play a 1, 4, 5 in B? This is what they're talking about. They're saying the 1, 4, 5 chords. Unless you play bass, in which case it's just notes 1, 4, 5. Or if you play saxophone, it's just notes 1, 4, 5. Unless they ask you to play arpeggios or something. So the 1, 4, 5, in any key, will sound like this. And then back to the 1. 1, 4, 5, 1. 1, 4, 5, 1. They are what, in classical music, we call those the primary chords, because they're the major ones, and they're used more often. very bright sound, but we can accommodate every note in the scale with those 3 chords. Any melody you think of or you play using our 8 note numbers can be harmonised, in other words, supported by those 3 chords. So that's why someone like Bob Dylan can get away with writing loads of songs with just 3 chords. 3 chords and the truth. When they talk about 3 chords and the truth, the chords they're talking about are 1, 4, 5. 1, 4, 5. Or in a different key, 1, 4, 5. Or in a different key, 1, 4, 5. There's a lot of 1, 4, 5s using open chords. We can do G, C, D, A, D, E, D, G, A. That's it. We can nearly do E, A, B. But B isn't really an open, well, B7 is an open chord, just about. That was what Dave was playing last night for a B7. Every musician should recognise that sound, because the 1, 4, 5 it's not possible to not recognise it. If you're a musician, you must recognise the 1, 4, 5 sound, because every chord sequence has a sound that we recognise, unless we're deaf, or tone deaf, we recognise the relationship between one chord and the next. And that 1, 4, 5 sound, 1, 4, 5, is incredibly strong. Notice we've only got 3 major chords in a key, and I've just played all 3 of them, 1, 4, 5. We haven't got any more. So when you hear a tune and you can hear 3 major chords and they sound like different major chords, it's very likely that that's the 1, 4, 5. We could go 1, 5, 4. That's a 1, 5, 4, reminiscent of a lot of songs. Again, normally it's a Bob Dylan song because he's got loads of songs that are 1, 4, 5 or 1, 5, 4 or 4, 5, 1 or 5, 1, 4, combination of that. The primary chords, that's what they say in classical music. I remember writing that as a kid. Primary chords. So if 1, 4, 5 are the primary chords, what would the secondary chords be? Well, they will be the others, apart from the funny one. So the secondary chords are the minor chords. So 2, 6, and 3, sorry, I should have said 2, 3, and 6 are the secondary chords. In other words, minor. Secondary chords. Although in the modern world, most people don't say that. They just say play chord 2, play chord 6. They don't say play chord 2 secondary. They just say play chord 2. When I was a kid doing this at Newham Academy, the standard classical way of notating is that the 1, 4, 5 are written in large Roman numerals, like a big I, or an IV, or a V. And the minor chords, the secondary chords, are written with small Roman numerals, small I. Sorry, not I. Small II for 2, IV for 4, and V for 5. So there's big Roman numerals and small Roman numerals, aren't there? Whereas with our number system, we don't have a big 2. We only have a 2, don't we? But that's quite a useful system in classical music. So you see a little 2, you know it's minor. Mind you should know anyway. Because chord 2 is always minor. Chord 3 is always minor. Chord 6 is always minor. But I want to verify what I mean by always. Always, if you stick to the key. There's no reason whatsoever that you can't play chord 2 and make it major. But you're not in the key anymore. So what we're talking about is playing in the key. There's nothing wrong with going out of the key, but if we stick in the key, if the questionnaire or the test or the song or whatever is in the key, these are the only chords available. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. Funny one. And what you need to do, I would recommend at home, when you're busily practicing every day, 3 times a day, at least, string these together and see what they sound like. because that's what musicians do. See what 1, 2, 4 sounds like. 1, major. 2, minor. 4, major. 1. And then you'll immediately start recognizing some tunes. 1, major. 2, 4. That starts to sound like some awful hit from the 90s. God knows. Very, very common. Every sequence you can possibly make out of these 7 chords, mainly 6, but you could use the funny one if you know the shape. Every sequence you make will have been played before, thousands of times, because there aren't that many combinations. Whether you go 2-5-1 or 1-2-3 or 1-4-5 or 1-4-2-6 or whatever, they would have all been played before. But there are more common ones than others. Some are more equal than others. 1-4-5, probably the most common. Blues is based on 1-4-5. 1-2-4, like I just said, very, very common, very folky pop sort of sound, quite romantic. The most common, probably over the decades, has been 1-6-4-5 or 1-6-2-5, reminiscent of most 50s songs. 1-6-2-5 sounds like this. 1, if we think of G major, G is 1, E is 6, A minor, so I said E minor is 6, A minor is 2, D is 5. So we've got a 1. Millions of songs like one. That one. Actually, that's a 1-6-4-5, but it's very, very similar. Or any other combination. It's not for me to tell you the best one, it's just whatever you like the sound of. That's it. There is no right or wrong, as long as you stick to those chords. You could not change. You could have a song over 1 chord, but it's very rare. Most songs will have at least 2 or 3 chords. 7 chords would be very unusual. I would say them, but the average in any song is probably between 3 and 5 chords. That's about it. Most of which being about 3. That's chord theory based on a major key. The minor key is exactly the same, except we have a different order, don't we? Well, at least the order is starting in a different place. This time, our 1 chord is minor because we're in a minor key. The 1 chord is the 6th chord from the major key. So the 6th chord from the major key, which is minor, that becomes the 1 chord in the minor key. That's where the relative, that's what the relative means. It's the same order of notes and chords, but we start in a different place for the minor. So the minor starts on chord 1. So all you need to do is remember the order. And it is the same order as before, but starting in a different place. So minor, then the funny one. Then, of course, after the funny one is major, just like in the major key, if we loop it. So we've got minor, the funny one, major, minor, minor, major, major. And again, in the minor key, we have 3 minor chords and 3 major chords, because it is the same group of chords. It's the same palette that we're drawing our colours from. 3 minor, 3 major, and the funny one. The funny one, I call the funny one because I can't be bothered to call it diminished, because that tends to worry people. But it is just a normal chord. It's a double minor chord, so it's more minor than minor. So for instance, if I play a G chord, don't forget I've got the capos, it's not really a G, but it looks like a G. Well, let's play G minor. We're in a minor key. That's the 1 chord. If I play the 2 chord, which is the funny chord, it will sound like this. Very dark and ominous. Yeah. Not picnics in the sun. That's the 2 chord sound. then we've got 4, 5, and then back to 1. So I've just played a 1, 2, 4, 5, 1. If you like the 2 chord, the funny chord, learn the shape. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure if I've got it anywhere on my handouts, but I can always do one if anyone is really keen to play the funny chord. But you'll find it very hard pressed ever to find it in a song. I can only think of 2 offhand that I've played in the last 10 years that have got the funny chord in. Talking about popular stuff, I'm not talking about jazz. You get it a lot in jazz, all over the place in jazz, but we're not going to be playing jazz. You're not going to be performing jazz. I don't even perform jazz, unfortunately, because there's no money in it. Pop songs, you're not going to find it very often. What's much more common in the minor key is a mixture of the minor and the major. So the 1 chord, yes, of course, the 1 chord, and the 2 majors at the other end. So the 1 and the 6 and the 7, they are very, very common in a minor key because the minor sound sets the tone, or should I say sets the mood, but those major chords give it a lift, a bit of optimism, and then we're back to the minor 1 chord, the tonic, the 1. 1. So minor 1, 6, 7, incredibly common. Most rock and heavy rock songs are based somewhat on the minor 1, 6, 7. 1, 6, 7. 1, 6, 7. 1. Then we could go to the 3. That's major as well. Nice, optimistic sound. Then back to the 1. Immediately it sounds sort of, well, hopefully, a bit sort of like a record, you know, All Along the Watchtower or half a zillion other rock, pop, jangly stuff, everything. Lots of dance stuff is based in a minor key, and invariably it's going to have the 1 chord, the 6 chord, and the 7 chord. Invariably, I play, even though I don't have any interest in dance music, I do happen to unfortunately play it quite a lot. I listen to the chord sequence, and it's just like a normal pop chord sequence, but mainly synthesizers. You know, boop, 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 boop. That horrible snare, hi-hat sound. But anyway, the underlying theory is the same. The 4 and the 5 less common in the minor key because it is sort of a bit too dark. How dark can you go? Pretty dark if you play 1, 4, 5 as minors in the minor key. 1, 4. So if that's E minor, then 4 would be E, F, G, A minor. And then 5 would be A, B. 4, 5, B minor. Now that's very dark, you know, if you want to write a song about your rabbit dying or something, that's probably a good set of chords. Other animals are available. Very dark sound, but that might be great. You could start a song like that and then you could go into the major keys. Sorry, that, as you were, the major chords in the minor key. I think we briefly mentioned last night the difference between a minor chord and a minor key. Well, key is the whole bucket of notes you take your choices from. Now, in that bucket of notes, you can make lots of chords, major and minor. So minor chords don't exist just in a minor key. Every key, as we've just said, has got a mixture of minor and major chords and a funny one. So just because a song's got a minor chord in doesn't mean to say it's in a minor key. That's just a brief chord at that point in time. How do you know whether a key is minor or major? If it's got a mixture of minor chords and major chords and you can't quite work out whether it sounds happy or not happy, well, the answer is no one knows, because it is purely subjective. If you think the key sounds more major than minor, work out the chords using our major key sequence. If you think the song sounds more minor than major, then use the minor key sequence, because they're the same chords. In the real world, it doesn't make any difference. You can have a song that's in a major key, but but most of the song can sound minor-y. Major to minor is like a flow. Is the glass half empty or half full? If it's really obvious, like the whole song sounds very brooding, like Pan's Labyrinth or something, then it's definitely minor. You could even write it in a major key as such, but it would be a little bit confusing, because you'd be constantly coming back to the minor chord, which is a bit weird in a major key. In a major key, you'd expect to come back to chord 1, being the major chord. That's what you'd expect. That's what makes the overall thing sound major-y, rather than sound minor-y. But ultimately, it is a subjective call. It is a subjective call. What's not subjective is when you notate what you've done. So if you're going to use the minor sequence and call chord 1 minor, which it is, you've got to tell people you're playing in a minor key. Otherwise, they'll play chord 1 as major. So when you tell someone, if my keyboard player on stage said, what the hell is that song again, chord-wise? I might just say, it's a minor 1-4. That means it's a minor key. Yeah, so we look at the minor list and it's chord 1, chord 4. And then they immediately know what the chords are, if they know what key we're playing in. If they didn't know what key, I would say E minor, 1 to 4. And then they know that's the 1, E minor, and there's the 4, A minor, E, F, G, A. So that's it. They might know the general feel of the song. They just might not be sure about the chords if someone requests it and you've got 5 seconds to think about it. James, it's E minor 1 to 4. Oh, cool. That's it. That's all you need to know. Then that is automatic. 1, 4, 1. It might be a 1, 4, 1, 1, 1, etc. That's what musicians do on stage. Much better that than actually calling out letter chords. E minor to A minor, yeah, it's obviously a 1, 4, but it's even better just to say 1, 4. That's what I prefer. That, in my experience, that's what professional musicians prefer. They prefer the numbers. That's why blues players talk about playing a 1, 4, 5, because those are the chords. 1, 4, 5. If you go to maybe the options there. If you go to a blues jam, and they say blues, but it's a 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 5, then what they're saying is it's not a normal blues. It's not a normal 1, 4, 5. It's a modified 1, 4, 5. So it's a blues, but with a bit of difference. So what they're saying is you hang around on the one chord for much longer. They've got to say that, otherwise everyone's just going to play a straight, what we call a 12-bar blues, which I've got a handout about as well. So all of these numbers are what musicians talk about. They talk about the chords in a key. Hence, what we talked about last night. Hence, when we did Scarborough Fair, we talked about, well, it was a minor 1, 3, 7, 1, wasn't it? So, looking at the minor key list, the minor 1 chord is whatever key we were doing it in, E minor. So chord 1 is E minor. Chord 3, E, F, G, G major, because chord 3 is always major in a minor key. And then chord 7, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, major. Major. Chord 7 in a minor key is major. That is the default. These are the defaults. We have to have a default in music to explain it. It's like when you do maths, you have a default. It's called base 10. Base 10 is our default in maths. If you give someone a maths question and tell them afterwards that you were working in base 12, they're not going to be very impressed, are they? Because everyone's default is base 10. Our default in music is the major scale. And these are the chords that come from the major scale. And the minor scale is simply the major scale starting on note 6. That's why we call it the relative minor. And in classical music, the major and its relative minor have the same key signature. Now, key signature is the little group of sharps or flats or no sharps or flats at the beginning of a piece of music that tells you what key you're in. And, for instance, G major has one sharp, and E minor, which is the relative, also has one sharp because it's the same notes. And you can't actually tell when you look at a classical key signature whether it's minor or the relative major, or major and the relative minor. You can't tell. There's no way of telling because they share the key signature. It's like you sharing some keys with someone, you know. The only way you can tell is to look through the music and ask yourself, what does it sound like? If it sounds jolly and major, then yeah, we call it a major key. But even the minor key is right because it's the relative. You know. It's not wrong, but it's just... Most musicians can tell sometimes from the first bar or two whether it should be the major or the minor. I've talked a lot. I hope that makes a bit of sense. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll do it all again after a few more coffees. Let's string all the chords together. I'm going to string all of those minor key chords together and you can hear them, 1 to 7. So 1, minor, 2, funny 1, 3, major, 4, minor, 5, minor, 6, major, 7, major, 1 minor. Now there will be a song out there with that sequence, except I've never heard it, but I'm sure there will be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a nice one to remember, isn't it? Likewise with the major list, we can play all the chords. The song that I think of that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is Like a Rolling Stone by Dylan. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nice sequence to remember. But I'm going to now do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in G major. Don't forget I've got a capo on, so it's not sounding like a G. So if you play along with me, there's a good excuse to buy a capo. Stick it on the 3rd fret and you'll be hearing the same chord as I am. But I'll call it a G because when we put a capo on, we still call the shapes the same. So there's our 1 chord, G major. 2 chord, A minor. 3 chord, B minor. 4 chord, C major. 5 chord, D major. 6 chord, E minor. 7 chord, F sharp, funny 1, or F sharp diminished, or F sharp minor, 7 flat 5. You can see why we call it the funny one. And then back to chord 1, major. That's it. If you were a recorder player and someone said, can you play chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on your recorder, they'd probably give you a funny look and just play you the note numbers because that's probably the easiest thing to do. In other words, they're just playing what we call the root of each chord. The root of chord 1 is note 1. The root of chord 2 is note 2. Easy, isn't it? So you can play the chord sequence just by playing the root of each chord. And that's normally what a monophonic instrument would do. Unless you're really clued up with arpeggios, in which case you could play the arpeggio of each chord. Arpeggio, by the way, is all the notes in the chord played one after another. So if you're playing saxophone or something, and you want to play chord 1, and make it sound like chord 1, and not just note 1, you play the 3 notes in that chord. And if you want to play chord 2, you play the 3 notes, one after the other, in chord 2. They're called arpeggios, as we spoke about briefly last night. That's all you can do as a saxophone player. You can't actually play full chords. You can only play the notes one after the other. And they will sound like the chord. Sonically, we will recognise the chord. So, major key, if I was a saxophone player, over chord 1, all I could do was 1, 3, 5. There's chord 1. Over chord 2, all I could do is the notes in chord 2. Now all I could do with chord 3 is the individual notes in chord 3. And chord 4. And chord 5. And then chord 6. And then the funny one, then back to the 1. That's an arpeggio. So as a violinist, I used to play arpeggios, because we don't play chord songs for violin, not really. So a chord meant an arpeggio. But because we play this amazing, versatile, cheap, cool, sexy instrument called guitar, we can play individual notes, arpeggios and chords and make all sorts of other crazy sounds as well. Just like a piano. But of course everyone knows this is much cooler than a piano, and you can move around with it, you know, and do all sorts of funny sonic-y sounds. So piano and guitar are the two most versatile instruments. And I don't think anyone playing clarinet would disagree, really. You try playing, you know, Born to Be Wild on a clarinet and you see what happens. You know. Whereas when we play a song, we've got so many choices. We can play the chords, just stick to the chords, what they call rhythm guitarists. Hate that phrase, I've never used it ever. If anyone calls me a rhythm guitarist, I'm going to leave the room. There's no rhythm guitar, this is playing guitar. That's all. If you play chords and you strum, yeah, it sounds rhythmic. That's it. So, you could play the chords to a song and not bother with any melodies at all. For instance, that Beatles song that you might recognise just from the chords. Hey, you've got to, whatever there is, whatever the chord song's called. I can't remember what the song's called. Dave would know. Or you could play the melody if you're in an instrumental band. Or what guitarists tend to do most often is 85% of the time they're thinking of the chords in number sequences like this. So when I think of All Along the Watchtower, I'm thinking of 7-1, 7-6, 7-1, 7-6 in a minor key. That's what I'm thinking of. It's what everyone else is thinking of when they play it. But occasionally you get to play solos, which means you can branch out and play the notes in the key in hopefully a pleasing order, and then people like it. And then we call that a good solo. Good, as in subjectively good. But you can string the notes in a key in any order and you might come up with something great. To be honest, it's pretty hit and miss. You just string the notes together and it might sound good. And even if it doesn't, you pretend it does. And everyone thinks it's great anyway, especially after a few beers. But most of the time, we're just stringing number chords together. We're just stringing numbers of chords like this. So if I think of a song, I'm thinking of the numbers. It can be any song. Tambourine Man is 4-5-1. 4-5-1-4. So as long as I remember it's 4-5-1-4, I can play it. Doesn't matter about the key. So there's in G major, there's our 4, 5, 1, 4. Then it's a 1, then a 4, then a 5, then a 4, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5. Whatever words, etc. What the musician is thinking of is the chord sequence in numbers 4, 5, 1, 4. Not the key, because someone could ask you to play it in any key. And I don't particularly want to be converting E flat, F, B flat, E flat to a different key off the cuff very quickly. I'd much rather keep the numbers the same, 4, 5, 1, 4, and then just know the notes, the chords in every key. Keys are easy on guitar. If you know a movable chord, by definition, you can move it around, up a fret, down a fret, and the whole thing stays the same. Move it around. It's always the same shape. Changing key on guitar is really simple, much easier than on a keyboard. So we should never have a problem with changing key. This is why the numbers are so useful. And this is the heart of music, the numbers. If you've got a capo, it's even better, because you can just continue using open chords. If I'm playing there and I want to move the whole thing up a semitone, I don't have to think, oh God, what's the chord there? I can just move the thing up, and there we go. Instant satisfaction. Great. If you've got a classical guitar, make sure you buy a classical capo. Whereas everything else is just a normal, standard, what they call standard capo. Standard meaning steel string, acoustic, electric, whatever. Standard capo. But a classical has to have something that's very similar, but it's just a bit straighter, a bit wider because the neck is bigger. And it's holding down nylon strings. I hope that all makes sense. I've waffled on a bit. I think I deserve another coffee or 7. So I'm going to say adios, and hopefully see you next time. Goodbye.